I quit. And she kind of looked at me strange. She said, quit what? I said, I quit my job. We didn't have a mortgage. We had no kids. She had a really good job at IKEA. I had no risk. There are people who start businesses that put a lot of things at risk. So I give people who do that a tremendous amount of credit because it's really hard to do when you have so much to lose. I had nothing to lose. Once you hire your first employee, you will never be right staffed again. You will either have not enough work or too much work. On the first day of the month, I had zero in revenue. And by about the 20th, I broke even. And hopefully I made some money between the 20th and the 30th of the month.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lliam Holmes. I'm CEO of MIS Solutions, and this is another episode of Beyond the Startup. And so today we have a personal friend of mine, Peter Briden, who has decades of experience in working in the IT and technology field. And we are privileged to have him on our show today to be able to really talk about his journey from being an employee all the way through starting a business, selling that business, and then kind of rebooting his career afterwards. And so Peter has a tremendous wealth of knowledge to share. One of my personal mentors here at MIS Solutions, and we are so grateful that he can join us today. So, Peter, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, good to see you, Liam, and thanks for inviting me. My name is Peter Briden. I'm based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I've had the great privilege of working in the IT services space for my whole career. I got to know Liam and Jennifer right before the pandemic, and have had a wonderful, business/personal relationship with you guys since then. And like I said, I'm just thrilled to be a part of your podcast.
Fantastic, Peter. So, if we can just jump right into this, you started out like all of us, working for somebody, right? And talk us through those early years, like what your career looked like.
Um, I'm going to turn back the dial just a little bit, because I think how I got to that first job is somewhat interesting because I wasn't really a good student and I didn't do well in school. So in high school, my guidance counselor kept telling my parents I'd do well if I just apply myself. And I did get through high school by the skin of my teeth, mostly because I was the editor of the yearbook. And that got me C minuses and D's in all my subjects. So, but I did get out of high school, flunked out of college twice. And after all my friends had graduated from colleges and started their kind of adult lives, and I was still kind of just bumbling around, we were at a party at the first friend who got married. He got married. They bought a house. We were at a party at their house. He worked for his father in a carrier HVAC company. His wife worked as an administrator in a technology school, and they decided I needed to do something with my life, and we flipped a quarter to decide if I was going to go to IT school or HVAC school. And the quarter flipped. It came up for DeVry, the technology school, and I went there, and I actually did quite well. I was in my 22, 23 years old. I was ready, and that led me to my first career job. So that I just go to say to parents out there, because I'm a parent, my kids are now all grown, and the trials and tribulations you go through your kids, it's not all doom and gloom when they don't live up to your expectations.
And it's not always easy when you're young like that to know what you're good at or what you're going to do or where you're going to start, right? There's no blueprint. I mean, I think like most of us, you're in high school and you graduate high school and you kind of have this, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? Right. And so the expectation is you got to go to college, right? And some of us do and some of us don't. And not everyone's cut out for that. And I think that, gosh, Peter, as successful as you are today, to kind of look back as to, I barely finished high school and I had a hard time with college and you flipped a quarter, right? Yeah, hard to believe, such a successful person today started with really just almost a flip of the quarter as to what am I going to do, right? Um, Pretty amazing story. And so talk to us a little bit about that first professional career job.
So I got my first job. I grew up in New Jersey. I went to DeVry in Woodbridge, New Jersey. But my first career job I ended up taking in Boston. And it was for a company, it was called Linear Business Products. And the division I went to work for made word processors. This was right before PCs.
Mm.
And to date myself. So I went to work for them. I was young and I was hungry and I was ambitious, and I wanted to have the president's job someday, and I was on my career track, and that worked well, except for I didn't always play well with others. So in kind of that corporate world, this was kind of an IBM-ish like company, blue suits, red ties, white shirts, and that didn't always fit my mold. And I got my hand slapped more than once. I probably would have gotten fired if it wasn't that I was actually very good with the technology. But I learned the technology, and I was one of the kind of the front runners, and it allowed me to be selected very early on for this new training for this next gen technologies, which at the time was Novell networking. And so I was very early in my career. I got trained in Novell networking. My CNE number was 733. So I was like right on the front side of it. And that's kind of what really springboarded me into really being um, technically good at my job. I went from Boston, I went to Richmond, Virginia. From Richmond, Virginia, I went to New York City. And right about then, the IT world was in this huge shift. Linear couldn't really make the pivot from this closed architecture to an open architecture system, and that started to falter. At that time, I'd met my wife. She was living in Pittsburgh. We decided that we would live there. I went there and took a job with a linear distributor that was related. And so I started my career now in a different area. And it didn't take me long being there. I was only there a few months when I figured out that that wasn't really the right place for me. So I went home for lunch one day and was with Kathy, and we were talking, and I said, I think I can do this on my own. I don't think I need a company. And she says, yeah, yeah, that's fine. That's great. And I went back to work that afternoon. And when I came home for dinner, um, she said to me, how was your afternoon? I said, it was great. I quit. And she kind of looked at me strange. She said, quit what? I said, I quit my job. And she says, what are you talking about? I said, you said I could. You said I could go out and start my own company. She goes, that's not what I said.
Oh,
She said,
wow.
we're getting married in 6 months. We got like stuff to do, bills to pay. And you're telling me that you're going to be unemployed? I said, I'm not going to be unemployed. I'm going to be a businessman. And she says, I'm giving you 6 months. If this isn't a real business in 6 months, you're going back and getting another job. And
Wow.
that was the start out of going from being employed. And I spent 5 years. I learned my craft. I got really good at it. And then I moved on to saying, I think I can do this on my own.
What do you think that seed was for really wanting to do this on your own? Was it you didn't like working for other people, or you didn't like other people's rules, or was it the politics, or like what was the thing?
So, and I think you can relate to this because we were in the same industries. Is you would see people in your company that were selling, products and solutions to suit their own needs and not the customers. And it was like you're selling them the wrong product. You're selling it at the wrong price. And even if it was the right product at the right price, it's not going to solve their problem. And, so I got frustrated. It's like, just get out of the way and let me do it. Rugged individualism. And it worked for a while, where I was it. I ran the company, I found the business, I did the work, the true definition of rugged individualist.
Yeah.
And that's then things started to change.
Yeah. So I think the scariest part that I hear from most people when they're in that place where they know they want to jump, They know they want to do something better. They have all the confidence in the world, but you know, we all have a Kathy, right? We're all kind of worried about paying the bills. And we're thinking, geez, how am I going to support myself? How am I going to, feed my family? How am I going to, take care of all my obligations? And so when you think back to making that decision, now you had a lot of confidence and like, hey, I think I can do this. But how did you get your first customers in the very beginning?
So, I just want to, I'm going to tell you about that. But before you do, I want to go back to something you said before is making the jump. I have to be clear. I had no pressure. I had zero pressure. We had, well, I had a negative balance sheet when Kathy married me, but that was her own fault for not investigating. But we literally had no debt. We didn't have a mortgage. We had no kids. She had a really good job at IKEA. There was no risk. There are people who start businesses that put a lot of things at risk. They take out mortgages on their second mortgages on their homes, and they take all their savings and plow them in. I had no risk. So I give people who do that a tremendous amount of credit because it's really hard to do when you have so much to lose. I had nothing to lose. So with that, how did I get customer number one? In the 3 months that I was at that that company, that distributor for Lanier, I had met an attorney who wasn't a customer, but was looking to have something done, and they weren't able to help him. But I went and talked to him, and I explained to him, I'm like, this is what you should be doing. And this is how you should think about it. And this is probably where you should go and look at it. And he says, I don't know what you're doing for those guys, but you should be doing this. And I didn't have anything to offer him. The company didn't have anything to offer him. But he's like, you have a way of explaining things so that it helps me understand them. And two things. One is that not only did he give me that bit of advice, the second is he was one of these connector people. He was an attorney, he had his own firm, and he, within short order, referred me to three or four of his law firms. Now, I was familiar with the legal industry because Lanier made word processors, and word processors were in law firms. So I was very comfortable in that environment. And that was just what kickstarted me and, gave me a foothold in the market. So now I had some revenue and some critical mass. I knew nothing about nothing from running a business. I'm not sure if you've ever read the book, The E-Myth. Uh, so the A-Myth's a really great book, and I'm really glad I didn't read it before I started the company, because if I did, I might not have started the company because I didn't know all the things that I didn't know. But the E-Myth tells you all the things that I didn't know because I
Yeah,
didn't know
yeah.
any
If you weren't afraid before, right?
of them. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, then it started, taking on a life of its own.
Yeah. And so I think you kind of get going in the beginning, and in your case, you almost kind of had a seed customer, somebody who would at least help you kind of get going, and he had relationships that he introduced you to as you continued to do a good job, and I guess reputation was starting to be formed, right?
Hmm.
And I know at least in my business, in our business, the first thing that we ran into was, how do you know when to hire that first person?
Ah, so I have a story on that. So I was really running hard. Dude, I was running out of hours. And I knew I needed to hire someone. And so I I went to one of my law firm customers, and I said, this is what I'm thinking. And he goes, you're probably right. He says, but I'm going to tell you something. Once you hire your first employee, you will never be right staffed again. You will either have not enough work or too much work. And you will constantly be going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. You're too busy, you hire someone, now you got to keep them busy. Now I got to go look for more work. And now I'm too busy again and I got to go hire somebody else. And that whole thing. And he was right on that journey. For the first, up until we hit past like 10 employees, it was pretty much in that scenario. And back then, unlike today in the IT services space, everything was transactional. you basically sold time. And so, it was, on the first day of the month, I had zero in revenue. And by about the 20th, I broke even. And hopefully I made some money between the 20th and the
Sure.
30th of the month.
Sure. Yeah. And I think too, right? When you when it's just you, if you make a mistake, if you misestimate how long something's going to take, or whatever happens, you can fix that problem by simply putting in more hours,
Mhm.
right? But as soon as you hire that first person, they're going to get paid whether it was your fault or not. And so all of a sudden, I think it really creates a change in your company where you really have to start thinking about, profitability, and you have to, for the first time, start thinking about covering payroll, right? Even though it's, just that first person. But I think it changes the way that you think about things. And I think it changes the way that you start to price things, because you now can't just cover it by just working harder, right?
Yeah. And so from that standpoint, I took my share of lumps, by making mistake. It wasn't until I was in business 7 or 8 years that I really started to understand finance, started to understand unit costing and figuring out how to actually build profit into the business. Um, but ultimately I didn't. Fortunately, I had enough cash flow along the ways that we didn't starve. Um, but it it's a challenge, and I had, I had a cheat code. I still have it, but I don't have to use it as much. Is I like things to be the same. I like things to be neat and tidy. I like things to be very reliable. I don't like things to break once they've been set up or fixed. And so I was very much into documentation and writing down processes and procedures and checklists from the time that I was by myself, because I needed to do it for our customers so that they felt confident that if I got hit by a bus, that they could continue on in their IT journey. But as I hired that first employee, that we did everything the same and we knew what each other did. And that snowball just kept rolling and rolling and rolling. And that's what really gave us the stability in the company, the profitability, the gross margins, to run a really, really good company for a long time.
And I know for us, right? I kind of think about this sometimes. And when you kind of look at all of the other managed service providers who, certainly the industry that we're in, you either have these companies who are started by salespeople, right? And they're good at selling, they can get the revenue, but they struggle with the operation side. Or, like in my case, and in your case, Peter, like we were the technician, we were the people who did the work, right? And some of the other parts of the business took a little longer for us to figure out because we really didn't have a lot of exposure to that. And, sales is certainly a common one. Finance, taxes, right? Some of these other things. Um, hey, we're running around fixing computers and networks. We weren't, doing, a lot of finance stuff involved in that, right? And so you start to elevate beyond that solo entrepreneur, and you start to actually have a real business. And I don't think it's very long before you realize that if you're going to run this business, there's probably going to be skills you're going to be uncomfortable with, and you're going to have to learn them. Now, doesn't mean you'll have to be, a genius at them or be mastery level, but certainly the better you are, the better off you're going to be, right? And I think that when you start to get a couple of employees, these these other things start to creep into your daily life, right?
Yeah, and that is so, so true. Early on in my business career, after I'd started the company, um, I had my insurance broker was at some conference and heard somebody speak and picked up his book, and the book was about technology, and he gave it to me over breakfast one day, And he said, "Hey, I was at this conference. Here's this book. I thought it would be really interesting for you. You're from technology." And I read the book and I'm like, this wasn't about technology. This was about how the organizing structure of the world is changing due to the microchip. So yes, technology is in there, but it's really about how the world has changed over. The book was called The Great Crossover, and how it's changed from tribalism to religion to governments, now into this IT microchip world. And it got me connected with a program. The guy that wrote the book's name's Dan Sullivan, and he had this program, still has it, called the Strategic Coach. And I got enamored with it and joined it. And I was a member of it for 25 years. I met 4 times a year up in Toronto, made some really great friends out of it that, we really super entwined. But part of the core concept of this book is like your world is this set of concentric circles. And at the center of the concentric circles is your gift, your unique ability, the things that you can do that no one else can do. It's effortless. You enjoy it. You don't even feel like it's special. And then as the circles go out, it gets to things that you're, good at, okay at, not so good at. And the idea is that you want to peel that set of concentric circles like an onion and get those things to people who are really good at them, and build a team. And that team can be people that work for you. It could be outsourced people that you have on contract. But the idea is to get yourself so you stay at the center of those concentric circles and build a team that makes sure everything else gets done just as well. And
Yeah.
25 years in being in that program, I got about 2/3 of the way in. It wasn't 100%, but I got about 2/3 of the way.
Yeah. One of the things that I know I learned in my journey through this was that there are things that you don't like. And then we all have things that we don't like to do, right? That, to your point, we're just not naturally gifted at doing. But what never occurred to me was there is somebody out there who absolutely loves doing that thing that you hate,
Mhm.
right? And so just because you don't like it doesn't mean everybody doesn't like it. There is somebody who lives to do that thing that you hate. And I think sometimes we hang on to things a little bit longer than we should because we feel like that we have to be responsible for doing this thing that we don't want to do, and no one else wants to do it either, right?
So I have another observation on that that's a little different. Is because I see this over and over again, is when somebody has something in their world that they don't like and they bring somebody in to do it. Um, uh, Before they've really figured out that it's what that person really loves to do, they abdicate the whole role and function to that person and go to the things that they really like to do. And that person that has some level of success or failure, and when you pick up your head and you go back and you look 6 months, 9 months, a year later, you're like, oh my God, this is a mess. This didn't turn out anything like I
Yeah.
anticipated it to. I see that over and over and over again with companies. Typically, once in our industry, once they get into that kind of 10 to $20 million space, they can't get away from the thing they don't want to do anymore fast enough. And if you do it with the right person that's going to take it and do it the way that is right for the company, is right for them, is right for you, is right for your team,
Sure, sure.
it's a home run. But I see it go sideways oh so many times.
And the other thing I heard you say too, which I think is worth taking a minute to explore, is that Dan Sullivan peer group, or
Mm,
even just peer groups in general. And Peter, I know that you're really big into peer groups, and you know, I think when you are learning a new business, or you're very early on in that business, um, oftentimes there's very few people you have to ask, very few people that you can bounce ideas off of. And sometimes you feel like you're out in the world trying to slog this thing through all by yourself, right? Without that realization that there are, people out there just like you trying to solve the exact same problems that you are. And there's value in these peer groups. And I'd love to hear your perspective about, Dan Sullivan, and gosh, I know you've been involved in lots of peer groups, but I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
So, the strategic coach was the first one that I became a part of, and that was a group of, it was an entrepreneurial group. And, if there was an industry, you know, kind of vertical that they catered to was financial services. So there weren't a lot of other business people, but the principles were all the same. And I gravitated to that, and I got some really good peers who are still really good friends today. Um, but somewhere along the line, I needed something a little more. And right around um 2000, 2001, I got introduced to an industry peer group. This was people that just did IT services. And around that time, this is, post Y2K, dot com just happened. The industry was going through a major transformation. Superficially, it looks like the business model just changed, but there was a lot more to it than that. And the people that were in my peer group, we were all going through it at the same time together. And we would share. We would say, this is what our vision is, this is what our strategy is, and this is our plan, and this is how it turned out, and this is what's next. And we would share our successes, our failures, what we thought and what it ended up turning out to be. And it helped us all make more progress faster than we would have done on our own. And then finally, I had a local in Pittsburgh, the University of Pittsburgh had an entrepreneurial school, and I went and became a part of that and got into their peer group. So I actually had three peer groups, which sounds like a lot, but they all did different things for me. And the time that I spent in them paid for themselves in spades. It got me out of the business, out of the fire, to be, clear my head, think strategically, talk to other people that could look me in the eye and tell me the truth. And it really, really worked out well. Since then, I'm no longer in the strategic coach. After the pandemic, I just couldn't take the travel anymore. And but I still run my old peer group now that I'm out. I run another industry peer group, and I'm still involved with the University of Pittsburgh. So big fan.
Yes, I'd love to hear your advice for somebody who's thinking about a peer group. Like, how would you find a peer group? What would you look for? Because I know there's a lot of them and some of them are better than others, but if I had no experience and I was trying to think about, joining one, what would I look for?
Well, first you have to sort of know what you're looking for. Um, you know, I believe that, there's two traits that are really useful in being a human on this planet. One is curiosity, and two is the initiative to follow up on that curiosity. And so, that kind of learning journey and getting yourself in a place where you can get with people that you can give and take and get on that learning journey together. It might be a general business one. There's lots of, YPOs and EPOs and WPOs, and there's all these organizations that are general business. There's industry ones. Every industry has them, and they're organized so that you have some geographic separation. There's no conflict of interest. There's benchmarking and share you know operations and financial benchmarks. But you have to know what you're looking for, and then get in with the right people that you're going to have chemistry with. It's all about giving and taking. Nobody wants somebody to come in the group and just take, 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 take. And they also don't want somebody to come in the group that's a know-it-all and just tell everybody what to do. So it's
Mm. It's a
if
relationship, right? Mm.
it's absolutely a relationship.
Yeah. Huh. And so at this point in your business, in your life, I mean, you've kind of graduated beyond the single person, right? You've got a couple of employees. You're starting to enter these peer groups. You've you learned a couple lessons, and I think a lot of people, at least certainly the ones I speak to, they get stuck right about there. right? Where it's themselves and a couple of people. Um, they've learned some lessons, maybe even sometimes even gotten stuck, in terms of where they are, what their capacity is, and they don't really know what that next step is. But it's really discouraging, I think, when you get to this point because you're just not sure how to climb the mountain any higher than you've gotten. And it seems like a lot of people get stuck there for a long period of time. What would your advice be for someone who is feeling maybe a little discouraged, a little stuck? Um, they have gotten to the level that they can do.
Well, I don't believe in the Peter principle. I think everybody can keep going as long as they want to, if they're, you know, willing to learn and be objective and grow. I don't believe everyone needs to, be Elon Musk or Bill Gates or Steve. Not everybody needs that pinnacle of success. There's a lot of satisfaction you can get out of creating a good business that serves its customers well, serves its employees well, and serves its shareholders well. You can build that and run that very comfortably for a very, very long period of time. Now, with that said, is it becomes much less enjoyable if you're A, not making money, or B, you're fighting fires day in and day out. Neither one of those are any fun at all. And if that's the stuck, you got to go after the root cause and get unstuck and then on with your journey.
So I think that that's a good point, right? There comes a point in your business where what got you here won't get you there, right?
Mm.
You were able to muscle it up, you were able to make things work, right? And gosh, I oftentimes think about when MIS was much smaller, we were six people in my house around my breakfast. We used to eat breakfast together, right? There wasn't a huge need for a lot of process or a lot of documentation or a lot of systems because, well, there was only six of us, right?
Mhm.
But boy, there came a time and it snuck up in the middle of the night, right? We didn't see it coming, but there was a time when we realized, wow, we're going to need real systems and real processes and real accountability, right? And for us, I think that was that next hurdle that we had to, kind of cross. But I'd love to hear from your perspective, where you are in the business now. You've got these peer groups, you're beyond that startup part. What do you think people their next hurdles are, or maybe the next two or three hurdles? Where do they get stuck?
Most of the time, I see small business get stuck is when they have a leadership chasm. And what I mean by that is that the leadership starts to get too concentrated at the top, and too much is reliant on too few. And the volume suffocates any growth or expansion. And so in the IT services space where I spend most of my time, there's actually really predictable levels where this happens, both in revenue and number of employees. But the companies that don't get stuck recognize that leadership is something that needs to be intentionally developed, and you need to develop it before you need it. And so the idea is how do I take my existing leaders and make them better leaders? How do I make the layer below them start to become leaders so that as the organization grows, leadership permeates down? One of the things that people get confused is leadership and management. I will tell you, every manager needs to be a great leader. Not every leader needs to be a manager. There are people in your organization who are leaders that don't manage people or process. They're individual contributors, but they're cultural leaders, they're technological leaders. These are people that other people gravitate to when they need direction or answers. And so the more that you can intentionally develop your leadership in your organization, the better the chance that you're not going to hit one of these impact zones and get stuck.
You ever find when you're mentoring other companies that each of us have a preferred spot in the organization, right? Sometimes people want to be the CEO, they want to be the leader. Sometimes they're really good managers, sometimes they're great project managers, sometimes they're just great technicians, right?
Mhm.
And that's what they want to do, that's what they want to be, right? And they sort of reach this place where they're stuck because what they want to be and what the business needs may not always be the same thing, right? And I think that sometimes you have to realize it's okay, even as an owner, to hire people above you, below you, aside, beside you, right? It being an
So
owner is not necessarily always about, having whatever the highest position is if you don't like doing that thing.
I agree with you with a caveat is if you are the shareholder,
Mm,
you have to be very committed to the vision. Most times it is your vision, whether you're executing it or not. Um, and you do need to understand the mechanics of the business that you can't delegate away. But I'm with you. That doesn't mean you have to be the CEO. That doesn't mean you have to be the CRO or the CTO or any other executive level functions. That you can focus where you want to be. Um, I'm a huge Patrick Lencioni fan, and he's got a book that talks specifically to this called The Motive. And we're all raised, no, we're not all raised, but a lot of us are raised to say, "Hey, I want to be the big cheese. I want to be the top of the tree." And
sure.
so we're all kind of grooming that way. And then you get there and you're like, "Oh my God, this is awful." This is like, I
Not at
like
all
to
what I
do
thought.
that, and you're making me do all this stuff.
Exactly.
So, but I do believe that if you want to be an entrepreneur, you part of that is you've got to own the vision and you've got to drive the vision. It doesn't mean you need to execute the vision, but you got to understand how it's all works. Another really good book, and like them, love them, don't love them. The Book of Elon, around Elon Musk and the way he works, is
Mm,
fascinating. There's so many lessons in there. Nobody can do what he does, but there's all kinds of nuggets for emerging leaders on how to be successful in there.
sure. I know too that, as you continue to grow, people are people, and the chaos unfortunately ensues because you have lots of people, lots of opinions, right? You can put in structure and these kinds of things. And there are these other organizations like EOS is one of them, Gazelles is another, and there's certainly others. But um, did you ever get involved in any of those? And I'd love to hear your take in terms of the value that those can bring to a business. And when's the right time to start looking at something like that?
So we were a Gazelles shop. So that at the time it was called the Rockefeller Habits, and their thing is kind of the one-page business plan. EOS um, is kind of the system du jour, and so I'm a big fan of the core fundamentals of all those programs. The one thing that I'll tell you, my observation, is that these are all tools in a toolbox. We learned really well how to do business planning. We learned how to be very clear on establishing our core values as an organization and then living them inside our organization. We were really clear on our operational and financial metrics. And so the pieces of the toolbox that we needed, we gravitated to, and we did. One of the things that I see a lot of people do with EOS is they get stuck in the system
Mm,
as opposed to what the tools in the system should be able to do with you. So I'm a big fan of business planning. I'm a big fan of, meeting rhythms. I'm a big fan of core values. And however it is that you can figure out how to do those things in your organization, I believe that it's important. And, we had a coach that helped us. He came in, once a quarter to work with us on our business planning. And really that's all we used him for. We didn't really need him for anything else. Um, but it was how we all stayed on the same page, objective third party in the room. There's some real value to that.
Yeah, I agree. And so if you look at PC Network Services, the company that you founded, you guys started that company in 1990. Peter, you started that company in 1990, all the way up through 2014. And so that was 27 years, right? You had that company quite a long time.
Hmm.
At some point after you had climbed the mountain, you obviously started thinking about legacy, thinking about transition, thinking about what's next. What caused those thoughts? I'd love to hear your idea on that.
So just two things that I need to share, and then I'll get into that. One is that we had a leadership team that was super committed at the top level that kind of drove all of this down through our organization. My wife Kathy. Kathy ran finance, ran HR, and ran projects. And in 2014, when we sold, they ended up having to replace her with three people to do those three functions, and they couldn't still get the results that they needed. And she, to this day, tells me that she was very underpaid for a very long period of time. But getting the right person in roles. Now, she had people on her teams to help her, but she had those three functions. Clint Laviano, who you know really well, he ran all of our ops. He oversaw everything. He was my last boss at Lanier. He came, he had some phantom equity in the company, and we were brothers from a different mother. We were completely locked in culturally. He liked the operations side. I liked the theoretical side. And together we made that team, and it hummed. It wasn't easy. I complex service delivery is really hard. Keeping all those balls up in the air at any moment in time, if the fire alarm can go off and changes everything. Like you, we had a private cloud, and if there was a hiccup in the private cloud, the world stopped. And but it was a great company. It was very predictable. We had very predictable operations, very predictable finances. But there was something that I kind of had an itch. And this goes back to strategic coach. And one of his concepts is you live in these 25-year compartments. And, right when we were getting to that point in time, our youngest daughter was getting ready to go off to college. We've been running hard for a very long time. Kathy started getting involved in the business by year 4 or 5. And so it was like, I think I could do something else. I think I want to do something else. I just don't know what it is. It was right around the beginning of, the M&A cycle in the IT services space. So we had the opportunity to do an exit. Um, they wanted the company, they didn't want us. So we took that deal. I was 52 years old. Melissa was just off to college. Both Kathy and I weren't going to have roles, and we could figure out what we wanted to do from there. And I will tell you that that first day that I came home, and I'm like, okay, this is it. I don't have to go back anymore. When we looked at each other, it's like, uh-oh, it's just you, me, and the dog. How's this going to work?
Sure.
And then the dog died.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was bad. But we figured it out. But one of the things I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I established what I called my 4 rules of engagement. And what my 4 rules of engagement were is I'm not going to do anything long term until I try it short term. I'm not going to do anything with a bureaucratic time system that I have to be someplace at 8 o'clock on Monday until 5 o'clock on Friday.
Mm.
Whatever I do, I need to be able to do most of it from afar. So this is 2014, way before the pandemic, and remote work was a thing. And then whatever it is had to give me passion and purpose. It had to blow my skirt up. I had like I didn't want to have to do anything I didn't want to do. And it probably took me 3 years for that to settle in. And then it took another 2 or 3 years for it to mature into what it is right now. And now, 12 years later, it's getting ready to go through another iteration of that. So I'm gonna back out of some things, take some more things off my plate, and allow other things to kind of percolate up in. But that philosophy has served me well over this second half of my career. And I'm going to tell you that I've done better work in this second half of my career than I did in the first. The work that Gary Peak and I did at the beginning of the pandemic, when we would get, and we were just, I was, this was March of 2020. I was down in Hilton Head and we were sequestered there. And Gary and I would get on these public webinars. We have 2,000, 2,500 people in a webinar, and we would just talk through some logic and how to think about things. That was some of the best work I ever did in my whole career right there.
Really amazing, right? Because when you've had a business for so long, 27 years, and you sell it, gosh, it's never about the money, but it's about that legacy. It's about all the blood, sweat, and tears. And I think when you sell it, and I've never sold mine, but you talk to people and there's an emptiness in terms of like, okay, but now, what's next? What am I going to do next? Right. And what do I fill my days, my time with? And I don't know that you recognize, at least at that point in time, how valuable you are, how much you've learned, and how much you have to give back, right? But I think that for those people who wish to stay involved, um, the calling finds them, right? And they start to realize that what they've learned is valuable to other people, and that they can really help them.
So there's two things in that. One is I do see people that commit to something else too much too soon and kind of get locked back up in jail. One of the beauties of my life is my geographic freedom. We don't have to be any place in person if we don't want to be. And but I can still do the things that I do and still get great satisfaction out of that. And I wouldn't want to give that up by having something that I had to be someplace all the time in the same place. Um, the second thing is that everybody's different. I have, some of my really good strategic coach friends, they're retired, retired. Like they play golf and fish and travel and they have no vocation left. And they're happy as clams. So it's everybody's different. I'm not at a point in my life where I can do that. I think I would get bored really, really soon. I like to have gaps of free time for my hobbies. But I can't make that my life's calling yet. There may be a day. And so it's knowing who you are and what you need to help fulfill you, because you don't want to lose purpose. You don't want to lose your ability to grow. You don't want to lose your ability to have social interactions, outside of cocktail hour. You want to be able to, do the things that you want to do and have choices and options.
And if I think about from afar, Peter, what I see, you sold your company, you got involved in the coaching thing. You really seem to have enjoyed that. And I know you would never say this, and so I'm going to say it for you. Um, you have become one of the very few, one of the largest legends in our entire industry, right? There are very few rooms anywhere across North America that I can't walk into, mention your name, and people know who you are. People have met you. And many times I would even say people have been helped by you. A tremendous, a tremendous person who has really given back. And when I think about the second half of your career, I didn't know you in your first half, but when I think about you in your second half of the career, you have you have given back to an amazing industry in ways that I don't think you'll ever truly understand. And we're very appreciative for that. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that transition for you personally. PCNS is now gone. You're doing this coaching. You've developed your 4 rules of engagement. And gosh, you have developed a following that is truly nearly second to none.
Well, the following doesn't really that
Whether you want it or not, Peter, it's there.
I do like to be useful. And one of the things that I do think that I'm good at is understanding situations and meeting people where they are, and trying to get there and start the journey and make the progress, and that seems to gravitate with a lot of people. But I don't know, it's about helping others. Really, it sounds kind of corny when you say it that way, but if you take care of other people and you do right by them, things have a tendency to work out for you. And you don't do it for what it does for you. You do it for, what it does for them and how it makes you feel. And anything else will come out in the wash.
Awesome. If we turn around for just 1 second and we look back at your career all the way from the beginning, what were 3 pieces of advice that you might give to somebody who is still in the middle of walking out that path, that journey that you've gone through?
Um, so I'm a big fan that you need to find out what you're really good at. And it's not easy to do. If I look back on my career, the thing I was really good at, the pattern was everywhere throughout my whole career. And it's about taking things that are in disarray and making them organized, neat, and tidy. It didn't matter whether I my one of my first jobs was washing trucks. I love washing cars and trucks, and that's had the same pattern. I could get it from cleaning my garage. I fix up old Jeeps. The same pattern is over and over again. It's taking things that are messy and making them not messy. So that was my pattern. It's finding out the thing that you can just do effortlessly, that it doesn't feel like work. The second thing is to find things that are valuable to society. So, it's one thing to have something that you love, but if it's not valuable to society, it's hard to make a living at that, whether you're entrepreneurial or you're part of a great team. Um, I also think that you want to find something that you can continue to get better and better at. So if you can constantly be in an improvement mode, then you don't have to worry about the world or the technology or the AI or anything bypassing you, because you're constantly getting better and honing your craft. And then the last thing I'd say on a personal front is is to you know be very astute financially, even as an individual. Build your own little simple balance sheet, and live within your means. Always have surplus. I'm not talking about living in austerity, but making decisions about how you spend your money, because the rule of compounding is very real. And if you can start, constantly as you're on your journey, being financially responsible, it will pay dividends and give you options later on in life.
Surely makes some difficult decisions much easier to make.
Options are good.
Yeah. Peter, I can't thank you enough for spending the time with us today. And I'll tell you, I can't end this conversation without bringing up Kathy. Kathy is an amazing person, unbelievable, right? I have tremendous respect for her. And It makes me think about those husband and wife teams that are out there. Certainly, MIS was Jennifer and I. And I can tell you, I wouldn't have been able to do this business without Jennifer on my own. Um, Peter, you're an amazing person, but wow, you married well, my friend. Kathy
Well,
really, helped you guys through that 27-year period as well.
and just to and we probably could have spent a whole podcast on working with your spouse, because it does have, it's got great benefits and it creates great challenges as well. And we were very fortunate that we spent a very good career together and we came out the other side, and and still had a vibrant marriage on the other side of it. And it did, it set us and our family up for, success. And we're very, very fortunate for that. And Liam, I really appreciate you inviting me and being a part of this. I love being in your circle. I think tremendous amount of you and what you've built, and can't wait to see where it keeps going.
Thank you very much, Peter. I really appreciate both you and Kathy, and certainly all the gifts and talents that you have bestowed into MIS. We just think so highly of you guys. So thank you.
Thank you.